On social media and even in studies in literature of other healthcare workers, imposter syndrome often comes up as a subject. I think this may be quite common for new grads who are first practicing as occupational therapists, for those who are changing settings, or even those who may have several years of experience under them. The word imposter often has a negative connotation associated with it. You may feel like a fake, a fraud, someone who is deceptive. In Adam Grant's book, Think Again, he makes a very good point about how imposter syndrome is not really a bad thing at all. Many people, such as those on social media, will tell you to try and break out of this thinking cycle and how to overcome feeling like an imposter. Even I thought and felt like this myself and wanted to find out how to not feel like an imposter, to be more like my peers who are more confident in their abilities. After some reflection, here's why I think it's actually a healthy thing to experience feeling like an imposter as a new grad or whenever, really. If you are new to this channel, my name is Jeff, the OT Dude. I create occupational therapy content not only on YouTube, but also on my website and podcast. So be sure to check out the links in the description afterwards. Let's get functional. In Grant's book, he contrasts imposter syndrome to armchair quarterback syndrome, or AQS. One way to think of both phenomenon are competence and confidence. Competence, confidence. When you are a new grad, say with imposter syndrome, what would your competence and confidence levels be respectively? With imposter syndrome, your competence is likely high and your confidence is actually low. The opposite, low competence and high confidence, is when you have armchair quarterback syndrome, which probably originated from someone who watched a sports game on TV in their armchair and they're very vocal and they think they know more than the coach, when in reality they don't. And I would argue that your competence is probably quite high. You had to prove yourself through a series of accomplishments, such as getting into the school, group projects, capstone projects, fieldwork or clinicals, your board exam. Unless you cheated your way through becoming an occupational therapist or any other healthcare profession, I would argue that you are probably fairly competent. It's natural to have low confidence in any practice as a student and new practitioner. In fact, a systematic review in 2020 says imposter syndrome can vary widely from as low as 9% to as high as 82% across various studies, as indicated by the Clance Imposter Phenomenon Scale and the Harvey Imposter Phenomenon Scale. And also, findings show that imposter syndrome is often higher among women compared to men. It might be due to men often feeling overly confident. I don't know. Given the two syndromes, which would you rather be or have? The armchair quarterback reminds me of someone who fakes it until they make it, as they have low competency and high confidence. As a healthcare worker, this can be downright dangerous in some situations. Someone who is overconfident in their abilities may be prone to making more mistakes that can cause more harm. The best scenario is that patients improve, probably due to luck because you're not competent, right? The worst case scenario, which may happen more often, is that patients may get injured, their condition exacerbates, or it may even lead to death. Take PPE and COVID-19, for example. In the early days of the Alpha or even Delta variant, the disease was much more deadly compared to, say, Omicron. If an OT or other healthcare provider, such as a nurse or doctor, is overconfident in their ability to, say, don PPE before seeing a patient, they may not don it correctly and cross-contaminate others and spread the virus, either to another patient, to other staff, or even cause an outbreak in the whole unit. And this has happened before. Now, take someone with imposter syndrome, the opposite. They are competent, but they're unsure, not confident, right? So as such, they would likely question their PPE donning procedure. They would take their time or even ask team members for guidance. This would likely lead to a lower risk of cross-contamination and infection compared to the OT with, say, armchair quarterback syndrome. And compared to, say, just spectating a sport where there's less harm, an OT or other healthcare provider with AQS is much more dangerous than the one with imposter syndrome. Now, the highlight to what I've come to realize is that healthcare providers, such as OTs with imposter syndrome, is not that bad of a thing. The those with imposter syndrome are more likely to have humility and humbleness, more willingness to learn, a scientific mindset, they're more careful in general, they're more likely to use evidence-based practice, they may seek help and mentorship, they may make fewer mistakes, and most importantly, they are more willing to learn from their mistakes. Someone with AQS will likely have the opposite of these characteristics and traits. They would be less humble, not willing to learn, less of a scientific mindset, and base their practice off of old evidence that may no longer be supported. They may be more careless due to their confidence. They may no longer seek help and try to do everything on their own instead of working with the team when appropriate. They may make more mistakes and not even know it. And worst of all, they may not learn from their mistakes. And we all know how this can be dangerous in healthcare, as occupational therapists and other healthcare providers work with the sick and injured in settings such as acute care in the ICU or other units with high patient acuity. Even in lower acuity settings, continued poor practice can lead to harm, ultimately. And one of our main practice principles as occupational therapists is to do no harm. So does this mean, given the two syndromes, that the ideal mindset is to feel like an imposter for the beginning or even the rest of your healthcare career? Well, given the two syndromes, yes, imposter syndrome is better than AQS, but according to Grant, the sweet spot is actually somewhere in between. Just like anything else in life, finding a balance between the extremes is often the way to be. And this is true when you're feeling like an imposter, or even maybe the opposite, but you might not realize it. Grant calls this sweet spot the confident humility zone. And as you gain competency and confidence, you progress from being a novice, such as in when beginning of OT school, and more towards confident humility. However, if you fall out of balance in competency and confidence, one is higher than the other, you risk becoming an armchair quarterback or having imposter syndrome and feeling like an imposter again. So it's okay to feel like an imposter, especially when you first start out as an occupational therapist, a nurse, a doctor, a technician, EMT, whatever it may be. I would say it is even natural, as we all want to help others and do good and help our society. And while this may be dependent on your task at hand, your responsibilities, personal experience, your own personality even, your willingness to reflect back and learn is an important part of growth as being a practitioner. Is it always bad to fake it until you make it? Not necessarily. I mean, I've done this before too, to be honest. I think it's definitely situationally dependent. You don't want to look like you don't know what you're doing in front of a patient sometimes, right? However, if you sense that the risk may be higher, beneficence versus maleficence, right? Then faking it will not do you, your patient, your team, your community any good. So I say embrace feeling like an imposter, as you are completely not alone. There's many people who feel like that. There's even scales and more studies coming out to explore this phenomenon. Other nurses, therapists, technicians, even doctors go through this and feel like an imposter at some point. And personally, if I was a patient, I would rather see an OT with imposter syndrome than one with armchair quarterback syndrome. Those with imposter syndrome have very good quality traits that make good occupational therapy practitioners. It keeps them on their toes. It prevents them from being overly confident. It makes you a lifelong learner. And in the world of healthcare, it's not like you graduate from OT school with all the knowledge you need for the rest of your career, right? Even an OT with years of experience should continue to learn through practice and continue education, because society will continue to evolve. People and their occupations and habits will change. Science will have new evidence all the time. Technology will make our lives different, probably better. Beliefs change. Attitudes change. There may be new diseases. Whatever happens, everything changes. So an OT that practices today likely has a different approach and knowledge base than an OT who practiced 20 years ago. I would guess that as you continue to practice and gain more confidence, you will feel less like an imposter. You may still feel like one, but your practice is probably on a higher level than someone, say, with armchair quarterback syndrome. And it's okay to be wrong and not know everything. Admitting when you don't know something is just as good. How you grow as an occupational therapy practitioner is what you choose to do with the mistakes or the gap in the knowledge that matters. So let me know in the comments. Have you ever felt like an imposter? Have you ever faked it until you made it? After watching this video, did your mind change about imposter syndrome, and do you see it as having some benefits instead?